All right. I got a Commonwealth brother on my series here. Welcome to the Leaders Who Care series, Adam.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. I know you're a leader who cares, but we got to show everybody else right now that it's not fake news, basically, that it's actually real. So place to start. And I usually have to put an asterisk, especially to men, is to briefly introduce yourself. But I'm not asking you what you do right now. I'm asking you where you're from originally, where you are now, what you feel comfortable talking about your family and whatnot, and maybe something you've never even told anybody and you want to reveal to the world now. That's always fun too. So share a little bit about Adam.
Yeah, good for the asterisk. I'd normally be like, I'm the CEO of TerraSet. We do this, but I'll
Exactly.
take a step back. I am that, but I'm a British guy, grew up in the Lake District in the UK. I've now been living in New York for about 10 years in Brooklyn, longer than 10 years actually, as part of what other than me is an all-American family. And I don't mean that in terms of sports achievements or the values way, but I'm the only non-American here. I've got a wife, got two daughters who were born in Lower Manhattan, which I always think is funny when I grew up in rural England. Even the dog is from Texas. So very much an all-American family plus me. Immigration and rural to urban migration all wrapped up into one story there.
I think that's lovely. I mean, from urban England to, I mean, from rural England to urban New York City to Texas. That's what it's all about, right?
It's been an incredible journey that I never planned to make, but each step has seemed logical along the way, and we can't really hope for more than that.
Yeah, and it happens because you're open to it happening, basically, and versus like diversity is a bad word or whatever, things of that nature. So that's fantastic. So talking about you got how old are your daughters?
I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh, awesome. Jeez, I must be so much older than you. That's ridiculous. Mine are late 20s. A little bit of sorrow thinking here. Okay, there you go. What were you like as a kid? Looking at them, what were you like? Were you like sports, music? Were you exploring? Were you milking cows out there in rural England? What were you doing?
I was a happy kid first and foremost. I feel very lucky in that because with a lot of the work I've done over the years, I've learned that lots of people are not lucky enough to have happy childhoods. And I mean, I think I had a very simple childhood when I compare it to my kids now growing up in New York.
Yeah.
It is somewhat cliche, but we spent a lot of time outdoors. We played every sport, not to a particularly high standard, but constantly, and it was what we did. We did spend summers on my granddad's farm. I've milked cows in my time. And yeah, year round we got told off for like playing out in the rain, getting muddy. Um, I think I was a curious kid. I was always interested in how things work. So the next thing, to your thing of being open to ideas and open to adventures, I was always curious. I was always willing to take that step or look behind something. Um, I enjoyed school. Like I don't think I worked hard enough probably, but I did like pretty well academically, but not in a world where you learned computer programming or you went into internships in the financial services sector. It's very much a kind of a rural community. But I wouldn't trade it for another childhood. I had a wonderful time, and I'm lucky enough now that I get to take my kids back there in the summer, and they see a very different world to their day to day in Brooklyn.
Yeah, you're so right on, the different lifestyle. Like I grew up in Montreal, so it's a city, but it wasn't as big as it is now type of deal. And we were outside all the time also. And it sounds like you had a great education about life and what you were doing and people and what it feels like to have mud all over you, like you said, or whatever. And as most of us, we weren't all American, all Canadian, all English superstar athletes and this and that and the other. But man, we were competitive and had fun.
But, and I think so much of life is better if we think about having fun as part of what we're doing, especially in impact focused work like we do at TerraSet, like I've been lucky enough to be involved in. You sometimes it's hard, sometimes it takes a toll, but like you, if you can do it with a smile on your face, it's so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, well, laughter is something we need a lot more of, and that's a whole other series that I think we
Mm.
absolutely need more laughter out there and stuff. And the kids are overwhelmed with information and everything right now, like versus you wait for your mom to call you in for dinner, and that was the only bad thing that happened that day because you had to leave going to get back for dinner. So how did you get into getting a bachelor's in classics at University of Leeds, right? How did that
Yeah,
turn?
yeah, it's one of the least vocational things you can do, probably. It was an area I'd always been
But it was a
interested in.
classic move, right?
Well, yeah, all of the puns. But I loved it. I'd always loved history, always been fascinated by it. I think classics is amazing. I say it's the least vocational course you can take, but it opens you to a lot. It opens you to a love of reading. Like you need a love of reading. Opens you to detailed research, spending a lot of time in library stacks, or probably a lot more digitized now.
I
But to
think.
research, to philosophy, to writing, to synthesizing information that is there and trying to put it forward in a new way and construct a narrative from like all these composite parts, like things that when I went on into journalism and other things in my career, I actually think it was an incredible grounding for those things. But I would say that happened by accident. I did not go to university thinking like this is my road to achieving X. I went to university, as I say, I had that love of learning and I picked a course that I thought I would enjoy doing, and I probably would have made a lot more money picking another course, but it's again, I don't regret it. I had a wonderful time.
Well, I find it's fascinating because, and we'll get into AI maybe a little bit later. Um, there's going to be a lot of millions of jobs that are going to be eliminated from AI. However, the trades aren't going to be eliminated from AI. There's welders and plumbers and whatnot. And the philosophy, the history, the knowing about people and whatnot is going to start taking even more of what we're finding a paramount place for leaders now, because AI is going to do a lot of the other stuff that entry level and mid management even are
Mm.
doing. So I'll come back to that, but I find it interesting because of what you said. You didn't really go into that, but after you said that, you said, "But I got this out of it also," which is super valuable. And I think it's actually things are going to go in reverse in some ways. Now trades are going to be
Mm.
super important, and thinking is going to be more important than before. I'm sure you were envisioning all this when you were going to school, right?
Yeah, everything was mapped out. Look, I was there again. I grew up in the Lake District, right? So it's what the name would suggest. It is rural. It's the outdoors and it's lakes, and people are there sailing and things like that. And I always think that sailing's a good metaphor for a career in these things because you don't necessarily have a destination, and if you do, you are tacking back and forth. But you've got to enjoy the journey as you go. Do the next thing that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. Our firm's all about, talent and impact and how tech supports that and so on and so forth. The early part of your journey was in journalism, as you implied there or mentioned, but also sports. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think, as I said, everything I just talked about in classics leads into journalism, and I loved being a journalist. I didn't plan to be a sports journalist, but as I was coming to the end of my time at university, I knew I could write, I could find key information, I had the curiosity and the drive to get to the nub of a story and translate that for an audience. And then the chance came up to work as a journalist, and I jumped at it. And I think I would have done that in other areas of journalism, but I was lucky that it came in sports where I have a huge passion. So um, things followed quite naturally from that. I got a really good grounding for a few years writing about the world of sports. Um, but it then evolved into writing more about the business of sport and its social impact. And then that really started to lead to opportunities to work in those fields. the problem with opining on things is that sometimes people call your bluff and they're like, okay, you do it. And I've been lucky enough that's happened to me a few times. So yeah, I went on this journey of starting to do something um, because the opportunity was there and it was something that I enjoyed, and then just learning an awful amount as I was doing it and learning about all these different things that could or should or would happen using sports as a platform, and got really lucky to write about those things and then later to work in them.
And your actual education and what you love doing, I see a definite thread. I always see these threads that happen, even if it's not planned. But you develop skill sets that, even if you didn't know everything, you knew certainly plenty that you could capitalize on that opportunity. And people saw in you that they wouldn't have given you the jobs if they didn't think you could stretch and become better and learn and all that stuff. Was there any one or two experiences at there was Sky and Sports Media Group, and then you were at Benchmark doing great work there. Was there one or two experiences that stood out for you that really made an impact?
I mean, look, in terms of experiences of just the immense privilege of working in that space, I've been lucky enough to go to World Cups, to go to Olympic Games, I covered the I think 2010 basketball World Championships as a journalist, 2011. I might be wrong. I might have the timings mixed up, but 2011, the ice hockey World Championships in Slovakia, like just incredible experiences. But I always think at Sports Pro in particular, it was like doing an MBA. The magazine as it was then, and website and everything it's grown into, was really focused on telling the stories of the people who were driving the world of sport forward. And so I was in this incredibly lucky position as a young guy to be able to go and interview the CEO of Madison Square Garden, or the sponsorship lead for a major brand, or the person who was running a ice hockey world championship, basketball world championship, and really try and get into like the challenges of their job, what they were doing, what they were trying to achieve, um, and absorbing all of that, you couldn't help but learn some things about thinking about leadership, about management, about risk, everything that goes into then um, being in more senior positions. And I was lucky enough to get that almost by, I don't want to say by chance, but by virtue of just listening to these people, asking some questions, and giving them the chance to tell their stories.
No, I love it. And I also love hearing from them because I've talked to a lot of execs in sports too. And how did it happen at the beginning, like with you? And I mean, I was supposed to be a sports broadcaster. They were going to change my name to Mark Jansen, actually. And and because I'd done some stuff in broadcasting and took microphone, all sorts of stuff. But it's interesting to see some of those executives. People sometimes need to hear those stories to realize that they weren't that at the beginning. They were Joe and Jane at the beginning
Mm.
that did like you're talking to stuff like that and moved up and took advantage of opportunities, but also had people along the way that really cared about them to help them along in certain things too. I find it absolutely fascinating. And I love the fact that you were involved in the sports, but also the business side of sports and whatnot. And I think a lot of youth that most, I've said this a million times, 99.7% of youth don't make pro, even though their parents think they all should.
Mhm.
They don't make pro. But there's so much they can do in the sports world that's vast and everything. And I think they need to know that. It doesn't mean they're a loser because they didn't go pro and stuff. Moving along a little bit because we're not doing a feature film, unfortunately, but we do say always here in LA that you gotta leave them wanting more so that we can do a sequel. That's the whole thing. But the fourth industrial revolution has really been recognized as AI and tech, but people are saying the fifth revolution might be humanity
Mm.
and a lot related to what we talked about a little bit. When you talk about humanity, Nelson Mandela is right up there, at the top, and he created Laureus, who you were CEO, etc. Talk to me about how that opportunity arose, and share how you believe, as I do, that the significant impact sports has on us from our youth up, personally, professionally, etc.
Yeah, the opportunity came, I'd say over a long time. So I was offered the chance to come in and lead fundraising for Laureus, which was for me a switch from working on the social impact side of sport to fully embedding myself in like the non-profit nature of that. Laureus is a charity; it's a non-profit that was founded under the patronage of President Mandela after the role he saw sport play rebuilding post-apartheid South Africa. And so everything it focuses on is having social impact through sport. It is backed by an incredible range of athletes, of brands, and it supports an amazing array of hundreds of community programs around the world that have impacted the lives of millions of young people. I went in there to lead fundraising because I just, over my time in sport, just grown increasingly passionate about exactly what you just said, like the role it can play. And I could do a feature film on this. Sport is the only thing I really believe this, the only thing that affects every other indicator of health. When you look at the those indicators around smoking and alcohol and sleep and all the other things that go into a healthy lifestyle, sport's one of the things that really drives that by nature of the activity itself. But
Mhm.
Laureus takes that a step further. Everything Laureus does is sport to drive an outcome. So to drive a project that's using sport to drive education or livelihoods or gender equity or mental health. Um, and it has been doing that for 25 years. So it's interesting. I spent uh, I've been involved with Laureus for well over a decade of my life, and yet I'm just one small piece of the puzzle. And I think that's something that people sometimes miss. Like if you're I ended up in the chief executive role there, but it, you're just one part of the story. You're just one piece of the puzzle. You're kind of a steward of this organization for a period of time, which was an immense privilege and came with its own pressure. If you're running something that
Sure.
has President Mandela's name on it, that you don't want to be the person who drops the ball. Um, so it's an incredible experience. Whether it's, I don't know if it was more exciting that I got to spend my time talking to people like Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles about like how to use their platform to change young people's lives, or to actually do that work in communities with young people and community leaders. But it's an incredible organization that does transformative work, and very lucky to still be involved in now a voluntary capacity. So I still try and help them out, but just not getting paid for it.
How do you think, or has it impacted how you engage with your daughters?
It's a great question. I think it has. I always used to think it's interesting that there was this thing about like dads of daughters, and you would hear people say sometimes at events and talking, they'd be like, well, my view of things changed when I had daughters. And I'll say this transparently, like sometimes I used to hear that, I talk to colleagues, and it would almost be like dismissed because you'd be like, well, why weren't you thinking about this stuff before? Um, and so I would almost say it the other way around. Having those daughters like just reinforced for me the importance of the work that Laureus is doing, like
Mhm.
just in the opportunities it creates, in the force it can be for young people and young girls especially. And then I haven't reached this point yet, but um the terrifying rates at which young girls drop out of sport and they don't stay engaged, and the huge benefits they can have if they do stay engaged. It's reinforced for me that that work is so powerful. And I really, I'm never going to be someone who forces my kids to do a particular sport or a particular activity, but I will always be someone who champions for them, like that this is a great thing for you to be doing.
Yeah, and I love the fact, I see it in hockey, but obviously soccer too, or football. Women, in fact, recently in New Jersey, they had the largest crowd for a an ice hockey game, professional ice hockey game, with two women teams from Montreal and I can't remember what other city. No home team at that arena, and it was
Mm.
sold out, the largest sellout for that. And for whatever reason, why it took us so long to think that women couldn't play sports too, and they couldn't draw fans and all that. I think it goes back to the, way back when women were subservient or whatever, anyways. But when you do have daughters, and I have three sons, but I do have a bonus daughter that's married to one of my sons, and who's now my favorite by far, obviously. And but I do find it interesting because a lot of times as parents of kids, and especially seeing it as a parent of a kid playing sports, but also as a coach, the pressure sometimes that's put on that kid to be this, to be that, because we think you can be great. Nothing wrong with
Mm.
having the confidence, but you got to know how to play. You got to know what to encourage or push, and then what does that look like, and so on. And seeing how people sometimes they live vicariously through their kid to achieve things. So there's a lot of stuff about an important topic these days, mental health, and how it affects everybody in that realm too. And which is why I agree with you. I think sports covers so much of everything in life, including business, that we have to actually study it more. Um, I could talk about that like forever, but we're going to have to do a sequel. But I want people to know more about TerraSet too. Um, how did that happen? It's a 501(c)(3) philanthropic capital I'm going to even quote it to catalyze the nascent carbon removal um, and really making an impact on the environment. Um, in an area, carbon is a big topic right now, and carbon credits, et cetera, et cetera. Can you start maybe from the beginning? How did this company or this nonprofit come to be? What's the vision? What's the mission? What are you up to?
Yeah, TerraSet was started because of, I always say, an opportunity and a need. So the need is to scale these solutions. Carbon removal, which is taking CO2 out of the atmosphere that's already been there. Um, and additionally, methane abatement, refrigerant destruction, all the other things that contribute to us having fewer greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Those areas are a crucial part of any attempt to prevent or slow down, or at my most optimistic, reverse climate change. And they're so underfunded. Like there's such a shortfall in funding of where they need to get to. The opportunity, a need and a problem in itself, is that of a $900 billion philanthropic market, only 2% goes to anything to do with climate. And that is as broad as we can make that term. That is everything from animal welfare to planting trees. Only 0.1% of philanthropy actually goes to really tackling greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And yet, philanthropy can be so catalytic in growing things. So the founding team behind TerraSet, who had this idea, who now sit on my board and still drive a huge amount of our work, had this concept of like, well, what if we could take tax deductible dollars, philanthropic dollars, and use them to actually move some of these solutions forward? I was really lucky because I was at Laureus and I loved my role. And the one thing that I felt we should do more of, and we did some, but the one thing I felt we should do more of was more in the climate space. And a big part of that actually for me, and you touched on this before, came from having kids. And suddenly it's a cliche, but you are thinking about the next generation and you're
Yeah.
thinking about the future. And I just felt I need to be doing more in this space. I got lucky enough to meet the people who had this idea, and they said, "Well, we need someone who has experience scaling a nonprofit to come in and do that and build this." Um,
And you
so
said you didn't know anybody at all for that, right?
no, I don't know anyone who knows about carbon removal and knows about these things, but I know how to raise some money and grow a nonprofit and build a team. And so I came into TerraSet as employee number one. And I haven't regretted it for 1 second. Every day has been an amazing learning opportunity. Every day I find out something new about this space. Every day I get challenged. Again, I my degree's in classics, and I'll be sitting there with someone with one person whose PhD's in chemical engineering and another with something else, and trying to kind of understand what solutions can help solve this problem and how we can use philanthropy to have an impact on that, and ultimately to take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. So it's a privilege to work on big things and to try and solve this huge problem.
Yeah, and it does take a team to win championships. If you have five goalies on the field or on the ice, you're not going to win the championship. And it goes back to what we talked about before with AI. I think it's going to give the opportunity, amazingly enough, to have leaders who have classics background, if you will, have people background and humanity background and think differently, as well as the engineers and all the other people involved, and have the trade people that know how to make things, fix things, do things that AI can't do. Also,
Mm.
it's kind of funny how AI may get us back to basics, a typical, sports term to solve problems. I find it's amazing, and even arenas more familiar with hockey arenas have had toxicity in it that affects
Mm.
people, and the Zamboni probably emits carbons somehow too. And how has that affected people that go to the arena all the time? Not to mention the players being there. So there's so many areas that I still can compare it to sports, but it sounds like a super exciting opportunity and one that can really, really make a difference. How can is there any way people that see this, hear this, talk about it can help?
Yeah, I mean, we need all the help we can get. We need a huge amount of resources, of time, of energy coming into this space. We are building something that doesn't exist in terms of the greenhouse gas removal space, in terms of a lot of the abatement solutions. So, firstly, we're a nonprofit. I always have my hands out saying like, please support this work, please donate. But also, as a sector, we need to find other ways to tell this story, to spread the word, to really build something impactful. And so anyone who wants to try and make a difference in this space, we're always really happy to talk to them, talk about our learnings in carbon removal, and really encourage more and more people to get involved, whether that's via TerraSet or in a different way.
No, that's great. I remember as a kid, the only carbon thing I knew was carbon copies, and it shows how old I am. To It's crazy stuff. No, I love what you're doing. Little last question in this part here that I love asking. When in 2021, a client said to me about the year 2020, the pandemic year, they said, that was the year that flew by slowly. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. And even now, a lot of people feel like COVID was yesterday and years ago at the same time. And now we're already in 2026, amazingly. With all that's happened, what are you most grateful for and what are you most hopeful for?
Grateful, I would say a couple of things. Grateful, firstly, for I think the change that we've had in some forms of this, that someone with a young family, a working culture that I don't want to say um, is necessarily more flexible because it comes with its own challenges and constraints, and the whole world of remote working is a challenging space. But I feel like I have been able to uh, spend more time with my kids than I might have done if I was in an office 5 days a week, as I was before the pandemic. I've been able to do this job from different parts of the world. I'm able to build a team of people based in different places. And so that then ties into the second part of I like that the world has got smaller in many ways. I love that we're having this conversation now across the country from each other. I love that I've been able to build relationships doing this work with people who are trying to advance it in Singapore or sub-Saharan Africa or Europe. Like that's an incredible thing, and I'm grateful for the kind of I don't know whether I'm trying to say the smaller world or the more expanded world that has come from that as a result. I'm hopeful because I answer this from a real, very much a climate perspective. The solutions are there. Working in this space has made me more optimistic because the solutions are there. In so many ways, we're on the cusp of a green energy revolution. The technology solutions are there. There's increasing recognition of the importance of nature and biodiversity, like all of the things that go into solving this problem. The issue is really urgency. And again, coming back to TerraSet, like that's what we're trying to do. We're saying philanthropy can move the needle now, and we can do things now that have a great impact later because it's a ticking clock. But I'm so hopeful when I see the solutions and I see the incredible people working on solving these problems.
Yeah, I can't remember his name right now, but he's one of the top people in climate and whatnot. And he talks about um, we don't always have to solve the whole world's problems. We could probably solve 100 small problems that'll turn into big things,
Hmm.
and just check them off the list that we solved this, solved this, solved this. And it was brilliant how he put it together. Because sometimes when you try to solve too big a thing or so many things, you solve nothing. Because you
I I said before, there's only a tiny, tiny percentage, a fraction of a percentage of the money in philanthropy coming into this space, and we spend a lot of time trying to figure out why. And I think one of the big things is it looks like too big a problem for people. They look at it and they're like, "Well, I'm not going to be able to solve climate change as a whole, but I know I could do this smaller thing." And so we need to find a way to make it more digestible and to have people see what they can do as being part of the bigger piece.
Yeah, we can go do this another time, but I'm involved with an organization called Enough, and they have a nonprofit called We Are Enough, started by the founder of Tom's Shoes. I don't know if you know that
Mm.
company, and we're doing some search work with them. And but it's about you. So you didn't go pro, so you didn't become an actress, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. You're part of a big company, you're part whatever. You are enough, not enough that you settled, but you do make a difference. You are valuable. You are enough in the whole thing, and your vote, your one vote, is enough. That type of mentality, to your point, I think, is we have to get into. Hey, I'm grateful. Well, I'm grateful for having a new friend. That's a good way to start, and I'm grateful that you are a leader who cares, and which is what I'm hopeful for also. I think there's a lot of people that do care, and they can take it on like you have, or they can see other things and help out. And that's a good way to care also. So thanks for being that, and for being on our Leaders Who Care series. You showed them that you do care.
I hope so. I very much do. And thank you so much for helping us tell our story, Mark. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.